I was a cop on duty this New Year's Eve, and I fell for a younger man. I was 30, a seasoned cop working the bustling streets during New Year's Eve, when I met him. Jason Parker, 22 years old, with a fire in his eyes and a story I couldn't ignore. Amid the chaos of fireworks and drunken cheers, our worlds collided. What began as a fleeting encounter turned into the most intense and beautiful love of my life. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I found myself drawn to him in a way I couldn't explain. By the time our lips met under the glow of the fireworks, I knew nothing would ever be the same. This is the story of how one unforgettable kiss sparked a love that would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, my career, and my future. The cold winter air nipped at my face as I walked the crowded streets of downtown, my patrol uniform doing little to keep the chill away. It was New Year's Eve, and the city was alive with excitement. Laughter, music, and the occasional pop of fireworks filled the air as people gathered to celebrate the arrival of a new year. For me, it was just another shift, a night of ensuring public safety while the rest of the world let loose. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary. Then I saw him. He stood near a lamppost, slightly apart from the crowd. His coat was too thin for the weather, and his auburn hair caught the glow of the streetlights in a way that made him impossible to ignore. There was something about him, a mix of vulnerability and strength, that drew my attention. His hazel eyes darted nervously through the crowd as if he were looking for someone or something. I couldn't tell if he was lost, upset, or just overwhelmed by the chaos around him. My instincts as a cop kicked in. "Hey, you okay?" I asked, keeping my tone calm and approachable as I stepped closer. He looked up at me, startled, and I saw a flicker of embarrassment cross his face. "Yeah, I'm fine," he said, his voice steady but laced with something deeper, sadness maybe. "Just waiting for a friend." I nodded, but something didn't sit right. His hands were shaking, not just from the cold, and he kept glancing at his phone like he was expecting a call that would never come. "Big night to be alone," I said, trying to keep the conversation light. He shrugged. "Plans fell through." I hesitated, not wanting to intrude but unable to walk away. There was an air of loneliness around him that I couldn't ignore. "What's your name?" "Jason," he said after a pause. "Nice to meet you, Jason." "I'm Ryan." I didn't usually offer my first name while on duty, but something about this moment felt different, personal. Jason gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, officer. I'm okay, really. You don't have to worry about me." "I know," I said, stepping back slightly. "But if you need anything, or just want someone to talk to, let me know. I'll be around." For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. But as I turned to walk away, he spoke again. "Ryan?" I turned back. "Yeah? Do you ever feel like you're out of place? Like everyone around you is moving forward and you're just stuck?" His voice was soft, almost lost in the noise of the crowd, but his words hit me harder than I expected. "More than I'd like to admit," I said honestly. Jason nodded, looking down at his feet. "I don't know why I said that. Sorry." "Don't apologize," I said, my voice firm but kind. Sometimes it helps to say it out loud. Before either of us could say more, a group of revelers stumbled past, shouting and laughing as they waved sparklers in the air. Jason stepped back, startled, and bumped into me. I steadied him instinctively, my hand resting on his shoulder for a moment longer than necessary. "Thanks," he said, his cheeks flushing as he stepped away. "No problem," I said, feeling a warmth in my chest that had nothing to do with the freezing air. As the minutes ticked closer to midnight, I found myself glancing back at Jason more often than I should have. He stayed near the lamppost, his expression a mix of longing and resignation. I wanted to go back to him, to ask more questions, but duty called. My radio buzzed with updates from my partner, and I had to keep moving. But as the countdown began, I found myself drawn back to that corner. 10 seconds. 9. 8. The crowd surged forward, cheering and shouting as the fireworks exploded overhead. And there he was, still standing alone, his eyes reflecting the vibrant colors of the sky. Without thinking, I moved toward him. "Happy New Year, Jason," I said as the clock struck midnight. He looked at me, surprised, and then, impulsively, recklessly, I leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't planned, wasn't something I had ever imagined doing, but in that moment, it felt right. The world around us seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of us and the electric connection of that kiss. When we finally pulled apart, Jason stared at me, his expression a mix of shock and something else, something that mirrored the emotions swirling inside me. "Happy New Year, Ryan," he said softly, a small smile playing at his lips. I knew then that my life was about to change in ways I couldn't have imagined. The kiss lingered in my mind long after the cheers of Happy New Year had faded into the background noise of the city. Jason's lips had been soft, hesitant, and yet there was something about the way he looked at me afterward that had ignited a fire inside me. It wasn't just attraction, it was something deeper, something I couldn't fully understand yet. But I knew I wanted to see him again. Was that part of your police duties? Jason asked with a nervous chuckle, breaking the silence between us. I laughed, a bit awkwardly, and shook my head. No, definitely not in the training manual. Jason's cheeks flushed, and he looked down, fumbling with his phone as if searching for the right thing to say. I didn't mind, he murmured. For a moment, we stood there, the chaos of the city swirling around us while we stayed locked in our little bubble. But duty called once again as my radio crackled with updates. My partner, Grant, was asking for my location. I have to get back, I said reluctantly, my eyes searching Jason's face. But I'd like to see you again. Can I give you my number? Jason's eyes widened slightly in surprise but then softened into a smile. Yeah? I'd like that. I quickly scribbled my number on a scrap of paper from my pocket and handed it to him. Call me. Anytime. Jason nodded, holding the paper carefully like it was something precious. Thanks, Ryan, for tonight. As I walked away, I couldn't help but glance back over my shoulder. Jason was still standing there, the faintest smile on his lips as he watched me leave. Something told me this wasn't the last time our paths would cross. The next day, my mind was a whirlwind of thoughts about Jason. I tried to focus on my work, but every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat, hoping it was him. It wasn't until late afternoon, as I was heading home from my shift, that his name popped up on my screen. Hey Jason, I answered, trying to keep my voice calm despite the surge of excitement. Hi Ryan, he said, his voice a mix of nervousness and warmth. I hope I'm not interrupting anything. Not at all, I said quickly. I'm just getting off work. What's up? I was wondering if, maybe you'd like to meet up, just to talk? I mean, if you're free. A part of me wanted to say yes immediately, but the other part, the cautious, professional part, hesitated. Relationships had never been my strong suit, and I wasn't sure what this was turning into. Still, I couldn't ignore the pull I felt toward him. Sure, I said finally. Where would you like to meet? There's a coffee shop downtown. Brew and Bean, do you know it? I do, I said smiling. I'll meet you there in an hour. When I walked into the coffee shop, Jason was already there, sitting at a corner table with his hands wrapped around a steaming mug. He looked up as the doorbell jingled, and his face lit up with a smile that made my chest tighten. Hey, he said as I approached, motioning to the seat across from him. Hey, I replied, sitting down. How's your day been? Better now, he said with a hint of shyness. I wasn't sure if you'd actually show up. Why wouldn't I asked, genuinely curious. Jason shrugged, his fingers tracing the rim of his mug. I don't know. Maybe you'd regret last night or think it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake, I said firmly, leaning forward. Not even close. Jason's cheeks flushed again, and he looked down, smiling softly. Good. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about it. The conversation flowed easily after that. We talked about everything, his studies, my work, the way both of us had stumbled into that moment on New Year's Eve. Jason's openness was refreshing, a stark contrast to the guarded nature I had developed over years on the force. But there was something he wasn't saying, a shadow that seemed to cross his face whenever the topic of his family came up. What about your family? I asked carefully. Jason hesitated, his smile faltering. They wouldn't understand, he said finally. They're not exactly supportive of, well, this. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. That makes two of us, I said quietly. Jason looked up, his hazel eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart ache. Then why are you here? Because I don't want to let fear dictate my life anymore, I said honestly. And because you're worth it. Jason's smile returned, softer this time but no less radiant. You are too, he said. As the evening wore on, I realized just how much I wanted to make this work. But I also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jason's family, my career, society's expectations, all of it loomed over us like a storm cloud. But for now, in that little coffee shop, none of it mattered. All that mattered was him. The days following that first coffee date were a blur of stolen moments and hidden texts. We couldn't afford to be open about what was happening between us, at least, not yet. Jason's family wouldn't understand. They'd been clear about their expectations for him, especially when it came to his relationships. And as for me, well, the last thing I wanted was to risk my career by getting involved in something that could be seen as inappropriate. But even with all the complications, I couldn't stay away from him. Our secret meetings became more frequent, Quiet dinners, walks in the park, late-night phone calls that lasted until the sun began to rise. Jason seemed to thrive on the smallness of the moments we shared. He would often laugh at the way I couldn't help but watch the clock, always aware of the time, always afraid that someone would see us together. But that fear was quickly replaced by an undeniable desire to be close to him. To have him in my life, even if it meant keeping our love hidden for a while. It was one night, after a particularly long shift, that Jason invited me over to his apartment. I hesitated at first, knowing what it might mean, our first real time alone, no distractions, no excuses, but something in the way he said my name made it impossible to say no. "I need you, Ryan," he'd said on the phone, his voice a mixture of longing and vulnerability. "Please." As I entered his apartment that evening, Jason was standing in the kitchen, stirring something on the stove. The smell of pasta filled the air, and for a moment, it felt like we were just two ordinary people, sharing a quiet evening in. But the reality of our situation, of what we were doing, hung heavily between us. "I made dinner," he said with a smile, clearly nervous but trying to act casual. "I know it's nothing fancy, but I thought we could eat together." "It smells amazing," I replied, trying to ease the tension in my voice. "I'm sure it's perfect." Jason set the table, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for the plates. I watched him, wondering just how much he was holding back. There was a sadness in his eyes, something I hadn't seen before, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. After a few minutes of awkward silence, I finally spoke up. "What's wrong, Jason?" He froze for a moment, clearly not expecting me to ask. Then he set down the fork he'd been holding and looked at me, his gaze filled with something I couldn't quite place. "My parents," he said quietly, "they don't know about us. And I don't know how to tell them." The weight of his words hit me like a ton of bricks. I'd known it was coming, the reality of his family's disapproval, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "You don't have to tell them right away," I said, trying to reassure him. "We'll figure it out, together." Jason shook his head. "It's not that simple. They expect me to follow their path, Ryan. Get a steady job, get married to a woman, settle down. They'll never accept me. Accepting this." His voice broke slightly at the end, and my heart ached for him. "I know it's hard," I said, moving closer to him. "But you don't have to be alone in this. I'm here. And I'll fight for us, Jason. I swear I will." He met my eyes, his face a mixture of hope and doubt. "You really think we can make this work?" "I don't think. I know," I replied with conviction. "We can make it through anything, as long as we don't give up on each other." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Instead, it was filled with the quiet understanding that we were in this together, no matter the obstacles, no matter the pain that might come. We ate dinner that night, though the conversation was quieter than usual, both of us consumed by our thoughts and the weight of the unspoken fears between us. As I left his apartment that evening, Jason kissed me at the door, a soft, lingering kiss that spoke volumes. But as I drove back to my own place, the fear started to settle in. Jason's family wasn't the only obstacle we'd face. I had a career, responsibilities, a reputation to uphold. What if someone from the department found out? What if this relationship, as passionate and real as it was, destroyed everything I had worked for? I didn't have answers, only doubts and questions. But one thing I did know was this. I was willing to face whatever came our way if it meant being with Jason. The future was uncertain, but the present was clear. I was falling for him. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care about the consequences. The next week, Jason invited me to meet his family. It wasn't something I'd expected to happen so soon, but he insisted. "They need to understand who I am, Ryan. I can't keep hiding this. Not anymore." I wasn't sure what to expect. I knew that his family had a different perspective on life, traditional, conservative. I was worried about how they would react to a police officer, let alone one who was in a secret relationship with their son. But Jason was determined, and I couldn't back out now. As we pulled up to his family's house, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach. The house was a large, well-kept place on the edge of town, the kind of house that had always reminded me of the American dream. Jason's parents greeted us at the door, his mother, a warm, kind woman, and his father, a no-nonsense businessman with a firm handshake. But the moment they saw me, I could feel the tension in the air. Jason's father's eyes narrowed slightly, while his mother offered a polite but reserved smile. "This is Ryan," Jason said, his voice steady but a bit tense. "He's a friend." A friend. The word hung in the air, and I could see the flicker of relief in his mother's eyes. But his father didn't seem as convinced. Dinner that evening was awkward. Jason's father asked about my job, about my background, and I did my best to keep the conversation light. But the more I spoke, the more I felt their judgment. They could tell something was different about the way Jason and I interacted, the way we looked at each other when we thought no one was watching. Jason's mother, though, seemed to soften as the night wore on. She'd caught a glimpse of something real between us, something she couldn't deny. But his father wasn't ready to accept that Jason was anything other than what he had imagined for him. After dinner, Jason and I stepped outside for a moment of quiet. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "I knew this wouldn't be easy." "It's not your fault," I said, pulling him into my arms. "We'll get through this. One step at a time." But deep down, I knew that every step we took forward would be met with resistance. By his family, by society, by the world around us. Yet, as Jason leaned into me, I couldn't help but believe that no matter what happened, we would face it together. "I'm fine, Mom," Jason said, his tone trying to sound reassuring. "Just been working a lot, that's all." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her soft voice asking if he had talked to his father recently. Jason's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I talked to him. Everything's fine, Mom." But I could tell it wasn't fine. The distance between Jason and his family had only grown since we had started seeing each other, and I knew this conversation would only deepen that divide. After a few more moments, Jason finally ended the call, his expression drained. "They just don't get it," he whispered, his voice low. "They don't understand why I can't just be happy with the life they want for me." I moved to sit beside him, pulling him into my arms. "I understand. But you don't have to choose between them and me. You can be yourself, Jason. You deserve that." He buried his face in my chest, the weight of everything pressing down on him. "I just don't know how to make them see. How to make them accept us." I sighed, holding him tightly, wishing I had the answers. The truth was, I didn't know how we were going to navigate the next steps. But I knew that I was ready to fight for him. For us. The storm breaks. The following weekend, everything came to a head. Jason's father called him. His voice was cold, clipped, as he demanded to know why Jason had been acting distant. Jason tried to brush it off, claiming it was nothing, but his father wasn't having it. "I know you're seeing someone," his father said. "I don't care who it is, Jason, but you can't keep hiding it from us. This has gone on long enough." I wasn't there to witness the conversation, but I knew exactly how it had gone down when Jason came over to my apartment later that evening. He was visibly shaken, his face pale, and his eyes red from what I could only guess had been an argument. "They know," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "My father knows about us. He's not happy about it, Ryan." I could see the fear in his eyes. The fear of losing his father, of losing his place in his family. And I felt it too. It wasn't just about us anymore. It was about Jason's entire world crumbling around him. "Jason, I'm so sorry," I said, standing up and pulling him into my arms. "But we can't change who we are. We can't hide this anymore." Jason pulled away, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "I know that. But I'm scared. I'm scared of losing them. Of losing everything I've ever known." I stepped closer, taking his hands in mine. "You won't lose me. And we'll figure this out. Whatever happens, we're in this together." Jason looked at me, tears welling up in his eyes. "But what if I lose them? What if they never accept us?" The question hung in the air between us, unspoken but undeniable. The truth was, I didn't know what the future held for us. But I did know one thing: I wasn't going to let Jason face it alone. We sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of the world pressing down on us. Jason's family, my career, society's expectations, all of it was pushing against us, threatening to tear us apart. But in that moment, as I held him close, I realized something important. No matter what happened next, we would fight for each other. And that was all that mattered. A glimmer of hope. It wasn't long after that night that Jason received a call from his mother. To my surprise, it wasn't full of anger or rejection. Instead, she sounded softer. "Jason," she said, her voice hesitant. "I know things haven't been easy, but I've been thinking a lot about everything. Your father and we don't always understand. But we want you to be happy." Jason's face lit up as he listened, the tension in his shoulders easing. "You really mean that?" "Of course," she said gently. "We don't want to lose you, Jason. We just want to understand." For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of hope in Jason's eyes. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to happen overnight, but it was a step in the right direction. As he hung up the phone, he turned to me with a soft smile. "Maybe there's hope for us after all." And in that moment, I believed it too. Each day, the pressure grew heavier. Jason tried to keep our relationship hidden, but the weight of living a lie was consuming us. One night, after another tense argument with his father, he called me, visibly shaken. "Ryan, I don't know what to do anymore," he said, his voice trembling. "They'll never accept this." I took a deep breath. "Jason, you need to be honest with yourself. The truth will hurt, but you deserve to live authentically." The pain in his voice was palpable, but he knew he couldn't keep hiding. The next morning, he made his decision. The truth would come out, and with it, the consequences. But there was no turning back. Jason finally confronted his parents. The words were heavy, filled with pain and desperation, but he knew he couldn't live in the shadows any longer. The conversation was intense, and when his father raised his voice, the tension was almost unbearable. "You're telling me you chose this? You chose him over your family?" his father shouted. Jason looked at me, standing beside him, and replied, "I chose to be happy, and he makes me happy." There was a painful silence, but his mother, though tearful, responded more gently. "You're our son, Jason. You always will be. We just need time to understand." It wasn't immediate acceptance. The words and resentment lingered, but the walls began to crumble. Slowly, Jason's parents saw that our love wasn't a phase or a selfish choice. It was real, and it was strong. Jason spent more time with his family, talking, explaining his emotions, while I stood by him through it all. The tension still existed, but the first step toward reconciliation had been taken. By the end of that year, Jason looked into my eyes and whispered, "I never thought we'd make it this far. But here we are." Another New Year's Eve arrived. It was symbolic, a new chapter. The last time Jason and I spent the 31st together, everything had been uncertain. But this year felt different. At midnight, he took my hand, looked into my eyes, and with a smile said, "This is our moment." And as the fireworks exploded, the kiss we shared sealed our promise. No matter what came our way, we'd face it together. That New Year's Eve wasn't just a mark on the calendar. It was our turning point. A transition from forbidden love to a life of freedom. Today, I look back at everything we went through, the challenges, the rejections, the battles. But alongside Jason, I've learned that true love isn't perfect. It demands courage, sacrifices, and above all, perseverance. The love that began on New Year's Eve, amidst fears and uncertainties, is now our strength. Jason's family, despite their struggles, has begun to accept our story. And over time, what seemed impossible became our reality. And so, together, we faced it all, because love, our love, proved stronger than any obstacle. If you've made it this far, we'd love to hear from you. What did you think of this story? Did Ryan and Jason's journey, full of challenges and true love, resonate with you? Leave a comment below and rate this story from 1 to 10. Your feedback means the world to us and helps us create more heartfelt stories like this one. And if this intense and inspiring love story touched your heart, share it with someone who might feel the same way. Let's spread stories that celebrate love, courage, and hope.